Do you know that you'd like to feel stronger? You just feel lost and overwhelmed with the number of exercises you could pick from, the number of repetitions and sets that you could do. And as a result, you never really get started or you never really stick with a program. If so, then this episode is one you're going to want to listen to. By the end of the episode, you're going to feel a lot more confident that you've got a step-by-step framework that you can follow to actually put together a program and then follow it through so you actually see the benefits and feel a lot stronger. Before I get into the first step, just have a quick favor to ask. So if you have been listening to the podcast and you found any value from any of the episodes, I would really appreciate it if you could jump over to whichever podcast player that you listen to this on and just leave a quick rating and review, because it really does mean the world to me to read those, but also it really helps the podcast get shown to more people, and together we'll get more people get started with strength training and take some action. Step number 1, goal planning. Now, this might sound a little bit dull. You're probably already thinking you might skip ahead and just go to step number 2 because you just want to get started. You just want to start doing some exercise. But this is a step that most people miss, and they then get confused and wonder why they've lost motivation 2 or 3 weeks down the line. I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but actually having a clear goal and vision of what you want to be able to achieve, because just saying, I want to feel stronger, isn't really enough of a motivator to keep you wanting to come back when that initial enthusiasm wanes and starts to drop. It's not going to be the thing that keeps you getting into the gym. Whereas if you have some clear goals in mind, so for some people I work with, it's being able to play with their grandchildren. Someone talked about wanting to get on the trampoline and be able to jump around with them and feel confident doing that, not worried that they're going to hurt something. You might have listened to Kim's episode where she talks about having been on a holiday, a boating holiday, and the shame and the embarrassment she felt when she wasn't able to pull herself up the ladder onto the boat and needed some help. So she had a clear vision of the next holiday she was going to be able to have the strength to pull herself up and not having to rely on anyone else, which she successfully did. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I would suggest going back and watching that, and I'll link to that in the description below. But it really helps if your goal is something you can visualize, because if you can visualize what you want to be able to achieve and how that's going to make you feel at that time and in the moment, and conversely, the opposite of how you'd feel if you can't do it and you're stuck. So again, Kim went from that feeling of shame and embarrassment to being able to of achievement and success and independence, and that is two opposing sort of views that kept motivating, and it's a bit sort of stick and carrot. But without those goals in mind, when strength training felt a bit more boring and dull at times, which it is likely to, and you're having a day where you feel a bit more fatigued, you just haven't got the energy, if you haven't got that visualization and that feeling that you're trying to work towards, you're likely to lose your motivation and give up with it all. Step 2, picking your exercises. Now, this sounds obvious, but we want to create a program of exercises for you to be able to progress through. And we need this to be a plan, not just a random selection of exercises. So ideally, we're going to cover the whole body throughout these exercises. So we're not just working upper body alone or just working the legs. We're selecting exercises with the consideration that we want to target as many major muscle groups throughout the body as we can. I tend to favor the compound lifts like squats, some form of hip hinge that might look like a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift. Could be a push-based exercise or a pull-based exercise. I've got a video that goes through all those movement patterns. Again, I'll link to that below. But the exercises are completely up to you. This is a framework that you can use to try and adapt and work to your strengths and work to your desires and your experiences with this. So there's no one right answer, because what works for you might not work for someone else, and vice versa. But what I tend to go for is 2 sessions per week with 4 exercises in each. Again, some people might only have time for 1 session. Some people might have time for 3 or 4 sessions. You have to thought about that in advance. So that is another reason why this is so important, that we're not skipping this step. So what we're going to work on, and I say we go for those 2 exercises or 2 workouts of 4 exercises. We want to schedule those in throughout the week, ideally the same time every week, but I know that's not always possible. But at least if you look through the diary and schedule those in advance. And then say we pick the exercises. So we want the 4 exercises that cover the whole body. And then the next one, we might do 4 different exercises that cover some of the other areas of the body we might have missed. We're then going to be working on that for at least sort of 12 weeks. We want to consistently work through those same set of exercises each week so we can progress through that exercise, because the biggest mistake I see is a lot of people pick one set of exercises for 1 week, and then the next week they feel like they have to completely change it up, and they pick a whole new set of exercises, and then they change it all around again the next week. And then by the time they get back to what they did on the first session, 3 or 4 weeks might have passed, and you're not then doing enough to see any progress within those exercises themselves. So yeah, what we want to do is pick some exercises that we know we're going to work through and progress through over the coming weeks to come. If there's problems due to a flare up of pain in a joint, or there's a real difficulty and you just can't get the technique and you're just feeling frustrated with it, then we can always swap exercises in and out. It's not completely rigid set in stone, but we need to kind of have this a bit of framework to start to work with to be able to progress from. So step number 2 is create the exercise or the program of exercises that you're going to progress through. Step 3, get comfortable with those exercises. So we want to master those movements before we start getting worried about how much weight we're using. Because if you're not confident with the exercise, you throw a lot of weight on really quickly, you're increasing your chances of picking up an injury as we do this. And a lot of people already have concerns that weightlifting might be dangerous to them. And actually, the loss of strength by not doing strength training is far more dangerous than the actual doing the strength training itself. And most of the reason of that is because we're mitigating the risks by making very slow progressions and giving the body plenty of time to adapt. So this is, again, buying us a bit more time. We're getting used to the routine of turning up to the gym or at home. It doesn't need to be done in the gym for strength training, but we're getting that routine of doing the exercises twice a week, 3 times a week. Let's say some of you, it might be once a week to get started. And we've started to establish that routine and getting the confidence with doing those exercises without any weight, maybe with a tiny bit of weight. But once you feel confident with the exercises, that's when we can worry about adding weight onto it. Doesn't want to be a step that we rush through thinking that we have to jump straight into weight to get stronger. Which brings us nicely into step number 4. We want to get comfortable adding a bit of weight or resistance to the exercises. So if we're doing, say, a squat, we might be using dumbbells, holding them in each hand. We might hold them up near us or down by our side, but then we can start to do that squat or sitting up and down from a chair with a little bit of weight. At this point, I'm not worried about whether you reach muscular fatigue or not during the exercise. I just want you to know what it feels like to hold a bit of weight and challenge your muscles a little bit more than you were by just doing things body weight. The reason I say weight or resistance, we might be doing a pull-based exercise. So if you're at home, you might be using a resistance band. And again, getting used to doing an exercise like that with a little bit of resistance and getting the right muscles and what it should feel like to work, then stepping up the resistance later is a lot easier than if we've rushed to try and do it where we start compensating with all the wrong muscle groups. So step number 4, get comfortable adding some weight to those movement patterns and those exercises that you've picked before we move on to step number 5. Step number 5, we need to start getting you confident, pushing your muscles to the point of muscular fatigue or muscular failure. So what this means is that we really want the last repetition or 2 that you do to be the last ones that you could have managed. So for example, if I asked you to do 15 repetitions of the sit to stand, and you got to the 15th one, and you could have quite easily done another 5 or 6 repetitions straight away without having had a rest. Unfortunately, you're not really building any muscle strength as a result of doing that exercise. What we really need to do is try and increase the weight or resistance you're using with an exercise so that by the time you get to the last one you're aiming for, so in this case 15, that is pretty much the last repetition you could do. So if you tried to do a 16th, your muscles would just have nothing left to give. They couldn't perform that repetition. And it's the last few repetitions that you did to get to muscular fatigue that are the ones that build the muscle strength. Everything before that was just fatiguing enough to get to these few muscle building reps. Now, 15 repetitions is pretty much the last repetition you can get to, or the most number of repetitions you can get to and still build some muscle strength. If you start reaching muscular fatigue at 20, 25 repetitions, no exercise is a waste of time, but if muscle strength is what you're aiming for, you're not going to get any muscular strength as a result of doing that. What we need to do is get it to 15 or lower. And 15 is, say, the maximum you could do, but you're still not getting a huge amount of muscle strength there. We ideally want to get it a little bit lower down, but at least at 15, you don't need a huge amount of weight to start exploring that feeling of reaching muscular fatigue. And if we can start getting confident reaching muscular fatigue with a lighter weight, then we're less chance of injuring ourselves and not suddenly loading the body up too quickly with it, not giving it time to adapt. Because that's something we can worry about later when we've given it a bit more time, and we'll come on to that in step 6. But for step 5, we're just exploring that feeling of reaching muscular fatigue. And we're going to try and do that for all the exercises that we're doing over the 1 workout, the 2 workouts, or the third one if we're doing it. So that is step number 5. Just get used to using enough weight and increasing the weight you did from step number 4 to find out what it feels like to reach muscular fatigue, which, as I say, is also known as muscular failure. Step number 6, we're now going to increase the weight even further to start to try and bring the repetitions it takes us to reach failure down from 15 closer to 5 repetitions. Now, the reason for this is, like I say, 15, you're still going to get some muscle strength if you hit fatigue or failure at 15 repetitions. But as I said in the last step, it's not a huge amount that you're going to get in terms of strength. You'll get a little bit of size, which is hypertrophy, but you're mainly going to be getting endurance. But like I say, the good news is you do get a little bit of strength, and it's a nice way of testing the waters with a bit of weight and getting used to it. But what we really want to do is, if we can start increasing the weight further and get you down to 5 repetitions or less, that's where you get a lot of strength for the outcome of doing your exercise. You get a good amount of muscle size and only a little bit of endurance. So for the same workout and the same amount of time in the gym, you are getting a lot more strength. It's a lot more efficient use of your time if strength is your main goal. However, you're going to need a lot more weight to reach fatigue at 5 repetitions than you are to reach fatigue at 15 repetitions. And as I mentioned before, if we suddenly jump to try and reach fatigue at 5 repetitions with a huge amount of weight on your back, if you're doing, say, a squat or any other exercise, you're at higher risk of causing yourself an injury. So what we want to do instead is, if you've already done step 5, you're confident reaching fatigue at 15, then all we need to do is just increase the weight a little bit by maybe 10% and see if you can start to explore somewhere between 12 and 15 repetitions reaching that muscular fatigue. And then once you've done that consistently for a week or 2, and you can do that for most of the exercises you're working with, then let's see if we can increase the weight a little bit further. And now maybe let's see if somewhere between 8 to 12 repetitions, you can start reaching muscular fatigue. And again, maybe have a month or so working on that. And then after that, we're going to increase the weight a bit further, or increase the resistance, and see if you can now get somewhere between 5 to 8 repetitions. Like I say, if you can do that, the confidence you gain from doing that and build and lifting with higher weights is so often overlooked as well. It's a really empowering feeling to be able to lift the higher weight and not have any adverse effect and feel the strength as a result. Step number 7, document your workouts. Now, this is something that, rather than it being its own separate step, it's something we should be doing as we work through all of this. But it's important enough that I wanted to put it as its own workout. So if you haven't already done it by step number 6. This is where we want to go into starting to make notes of the exercises you're doing, how many repetitions and sets that you've been doing of them. Now, again, we've already talked about repetitions and working from 15 down to 5. I haven't really talked about sets, so I normally say somewhere between 3 and 5 sets of an exercise. A repetition is how many of that exercise you've done. So we talked about doing 15 repetitions of an exercise. So if that's sit to stand, you've done 15 sits to stand or squats in a row, and you've then stopped. That is one set of 15. If you have a break and then you go on to do another 15, you've done 2 sets. So let's say we want to ideally do somewhere between 3 and 5 sets. If you're just starting out, I would just start with 3. So going back, we want to write down, say, the exercises you're doing, the number of reps and sets that you've done, and then more importantly, how much weight did you use when you did the exercise? And as you progress, the different exercises will have different rates of progression. So you're not going to use the same weight for all the exercises you're doing. And if you do, say, the 2 sessions of 4 exercises, you've then got 8 exercises to try and remember exactly what weight you use. And if you're not writing it down, the next time you come into the gym, you've got to rely on your memory to try and work out, was I doing 10 kilograms in each side, or was it 12 and a half? Was that last week or was that 3 weeks ago? And then it becomes a bit of trial and error, and you're then wasting time trying to then get back to the weight you were using. Whereas if you just wrote it down, you can look back to the last page you did it on. You can see I did 10 kilograms with it last time. And then you could also have made a little note that how easy you found it or how many repetitions in reserve. So when you did your 15 reps for 3 sets, you could write down, I felt like I had 4 more repetitions in reserve, which means this time, rather than using the same weight for this workout, maybe I should actually increase that weight a little bit further, because I said we want to get the repetitions in reserve down to somewhere within 2 and ideally as a 0. So again, you'll only know that by writing down, because if you've got to try and rely on your memory of a week ago, all the workouts start to blur into one, and it's a little bit harder to, firstly, know what you're going to do in that workout. But secondly, it's harder to see your progression taking place. Because if you're going to look back and see that you used to do something with 5 kilograms and you had 5 to 10 repetitions in reserve, and now you're doing it with 12.5 kilograms and you're doing it with 2 reps in reserve, you can see that progression, and that's really motivating, and that's going to help keep you coming back again. If you can keep looking back to where you were and see that direction of travel of you working forwards towards that goal, you're going to stick with this for a lot longer. Whereas if you haven't been writing it down, it becomes a lot harder to stick to these goals and stick to this routine of working out. So they are the 7 steps. I've actually got a couple of bonus steps that I want to add in. So the first one is finding someone to be accountable to. A lot of people overlook this, a bit like the goal planning. If you are sharing your goal and your desire and the outcome of your workouts, and you can let people know that, yes, I went to the gym twice this week, and then you kind of keep them updated, it makes you so much more likely to turn up and carry on going than if you're doing this all on your own and not telling anyone about this. It makes it even better if someone is actually going to be going to those workouts with you. And sometimes you can find a workout partner, and if you know that you're supposed to be meeting at the gym at a certain time, you're more likely to turn up because you don't want to let them down. But even if you haven't got someone that's going to go with you, if you know there's someone waiting to hear that if you went or not, or whether you succeeded, often that's a difference between you going, oh, I'll just leave it this week, to, oh yeah, I don't want to have to tell them I didn't go, so I'm going to turn up and do it. And then often once you get there, although you're not feeling particularly motivated, just being in the environment, doing the first set of an exercise, it suddenly kind of clicks you into the enjoyment of it again, and you suddenly start making progressions forward, and then you wonder why you ever thought about not going in the first place. So accountability is a really powerful thing, and something I suggest you try using. The second bonus step is baseline testing. Now, as you're working through, you'll see the weights improving and increasing, which is really motivating. You might have found things start to feel a bit stronger, but often that feels quite subjective. And particularly in the early stages, it's hard to put any kind of tangible results on that to confirm whether you just feel stronger or whether it's a bit of placebo. But there are some tests that you can do where you can actually see some scores and put some scores to it. And in my course, Stronger for Life, I suggest people do them every 6 weeks. So one of them is what's called the 30-second sit to stand test. So you basically take a chair, sort of normal height chair, and you're then going to stand up and sit down, and you're going to see how many times you can do that in 30 seconds. And as you get stronger, you should see the number of the times you can do it increase throughout those 30 seconds. Another one you can do is called the sit rise test. So you may have seen it on social media a few times. It's kind of done the rounds where you try and go from standing, slowly go down into a kind of cross leg position on the floor, and then stand back up again. And the goal is to try and do it with as few points of contact as possible. So the goal is, if you can do it without using your hands, you can slowly get back and or stand back up again without the need of using your hands or losing your balance. You've got a perfect score of 10. Now, on the way down, for every point of contact, whether it's your hand, your knee, your elbow, you add a point for each point of contact on the way down. And then on the way back up, you add another point of contact for each, or another point for each point of contact that you use. What I'll do, I'll put the link to these tests in the description below so you can see that. But again, as you get stronger, quite often see that the score starts to improve as a result of being stronger for that test. And again, that's really motivating to see these scores improve. Then for some people, it's less about the function, it's more about the aesthetics. And having some maybe photos you take every 6 weeks, where you do a photo from the front, the side, and the back. And you can compare every 6 weeks the photos and seeing the progression and seeing the body changing. Again, that is very motivating, particularly when you double it up with the scores from the other baseline test, the weight you're using improving, and the things you're able to do outside the gym feeling a lot easier. These are all things to try and help you stick with this newfound routine of strength training, rather than sort of just letting the enthusiasm wane and losing track with it all. There was the 7-step framework that I use with those 2 additional steps. So we had goal planning, picking and selecting some exercises, getting used to the exercises and feeling confident with them before we then move on to step 4, where we add some weight. Then we're going to get used to adding the weight, and then we're starting to increase the weight for step 5, where we're going to really sort of do enough to reach muscular fatigue closer to 15 repetitions. And then at step 6, we're going to see if we can increase the weight further to try and get your fatigue point down to closer to 5 repetitions, but we're going to do that slowly over time. And then step 7 was us documenting the workouts. Then we had the bonus steps of finding someone to be accountable to and keeping our motivation using those baseline tests. Now, if you feel like you need some help with all of this and you want a bit of guidance through those steps, then I've got a completely free ebook that you can download, and I will put the link to that in the description below, but it's nevertooldtolift.com/ebook. And that will help guide you through a lot of the steps you can take to work through this whole process and start feeling confident that you're doing the right things to actually build strength in the first place. If you have found any value from this episode, I would really appreciate it if you did take that time just to rate and review the podcast on whichever podcast player you use this on. Or if you're on YouTube, just clicking like on the video below and making sure you're subscribed would mean the world to me. And it's really going to help spread the podcast, which means we can spread this message to more people. And if we can inspire just a few more people to take action, then it's only going to be a positive. If you've got any key points in this that you found useful, please leave those in the comments below as well. But also remembering that next week, so next Wednesday, the 6th of August, is the first or the next of the live Q&A session. So I go live on YouTube at midday. So you can either join live and ask me any questions you want to there about getting started with strength training or anything around the kind of earlier stages of strength training. Or if you know you can't make it live, but you'd like to watch a recording, then please email me with your questions or leave them in the comments below. So if you're going to send an email, it's chris@nevertooldtolift.com. Or like I say, if you put it in the comment below, I will collate all those questions that come through And then I will answer those next week, and I'll send back out the recording, or I'll put the link back into this description for anyone who wants to watch that there. But for now, I will leave you to it, and I will see you in that live Q&A next week.